This episode of Distraction is sponsored by Landmark College in Putney, Vermont, home of the Landmark College Institute for Research and Training, working to discover innovative strategies and practices to improve teaching and learning in the field of learning disabilities. Learn more at lcdistraction.org. Landmark College. We teach differently.
I don't like to preach to people who are unwilling. Mm-hmm. So my hope is to gather the willing. Mm-hmm. And really the question is, are you willing to feel better? Mm-hmm. Are you willing to feel safer? Are you willing to feel more connected? Are you willing to feel more compassionate towards yourself? Are you willing to attract more of what you want into your life? And if the answers to any of those questions are yes, then I invite you to join me on this journey and open your mind to these steps.
Hello, this is Dr. Ned Hallowell. Welcome to Distraction. Today we have an extremely interesting guest, and truly stay with us because I think you'll be intrigued. She's onto a topic that I think almost everyone can relate to. She's a woman by the name of Gabby Bernstein, and her bio describes her as a #1 New York Times bestselling author, international speaker, and spirit junkie. She's a recovering addict, certified Kundalini yoga and meditation teacher, featured on Oprah's Super Soul Sunday as a next-generation thought leader. New York Times named her a new role model, co-hosted the Guinness World Record largest guided meditation with Deepak Chopra. And her new book, which will come out today, just absolutely captivated my imagination when I read the title. It's called Judgment Detox. Release the beliefs that hold you back from living a better life. Rather than me telling you why I find that so interesting, I asked Gabby if she would just tell us about her journey and how she came to writing this book. So welcome, Gabby.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. I'm so excited to talk to you about this.
How did you come to the place in your life where you wanted to write this?
Well, I've been in this field of personal growth and spiritual development for 12 years. Mm-hmm. And this will be my 6th book. And I have had the privilege of helping people in many different ways shift their perceptions and choose to align their thoughts with higher thought forms and use the power of prayer and positive thinking to change their experience of life. And in the last 2 years, as I was preparing to write this next book, I was becoming very conscious of a really huge, pervasive issue that we were all coming up against in a way far bigger than we'd ever known before. And that's the issue of judgment and the issue of division and separation. I was writing this book during the 2016 election and seeing not only just our country, but the world really far more divided than we'd ever really seen before. And actually, the truth is that I had the idea for the book a year earlier. So it was almost like I had a sense of what was coming. And my concern always has been that when we have these belief systems, but then when we start to voice them, we bring even more energy to them. So what we were seeing over the last 2 years and up until even this point today is the vocalization of the judgmental belief systems that many of us have always carried and had. So we're just seeing it all very magnified at this time. Mm. And the judgment's not just judgment towards others, but also judgment towards ourselves. And living with these belief systems of separation is what's causing all of the issues that we're facing today. Racism, terrorism, fear, all of the fear-based experiences that we're experiencing, unfortunately, every other day throughout the world. So my feeling was the best contribution that I could give to my readers and far beyond, hopefully, was to help people begin to learn how to clean up their inner belief systems so that they could stop polluting the planet with their fear and their judgment and separation. And I believe that as we begin to shift on an internal level, we have the power to start to experience shifts within our local communities and our families and our homes, and that ripple effect spreads far beyond our local environment. Mm-hmm. So my mission as a spiritual activist is to really help people clean up their belief systems, clean up their side of the street. And as a result of cleaning up your own inner terror, you begin to really heal the world around you. I believe that is the solution, and that's the intention and energy that I'm focused on bringing to the world today.
What if a person says, well, that sounds fine, but I just see so much horribleness in the world. I can't stop myself from judging it. I'm not just going to say, oh, well, that's okay, and walk on by.
Right.
I have to judge it. I have to say, that's terrible. I hate it.
Right. Well, this is something I address in the book. I don't by any means ask my reader to be apathetic or to turn their back on what's happening in the world. And in fact, I don't do that myself. I speak up very loud and clear about what I believe is right, what I believe we need to do politically and globally. But the goal here is to be able to learn how to speak up from a place of love and compassion, not a place of attack. When we meet attack with more attack, we just create more of it. When we speak up and voice our opinions and voice our desires and start to show up more socially in our lives, when we do that from a place of love and from a place of oneness, that's when I believe we can be truly heard. So that's been my experience, having a platform where I speak up about these daily issues that we see showing up. And I'm not going to stay silent, but I'm never going to take it from a one-sided approach. We can't fight an attack with more attack, and that's been my experience.
I wrote a book about forgiveness, and it was very much in keeping with what you're saying, and it didn't sell very well. I often thought if I wanted to write a bestseller, I should write a book called Get Even, because I think people would much rather respond to an attack with an attack. It's sort of wired into our brains to forego the attack response. You have to appeal to your higher brain centers, and that's hard for folks to do.
It's very interesting that you said that, because it's actually much more comfortable. Just as what you're saying, it's much more comfortable for us to fight back, because judgment ultimately has become this great protector.
Yes.
It's become the way that we protect ourselves from feeling the shadow part of ourselves that we do not want to recognize.
Right.
Protect ourselves from the fears of the world. Protect ourselves from feeling unlovable and inadequate.
Right.
And ultimately, to your point, we get high in many ways off of judging, because it's a way of anesthetizing the deep-rooted pain.
Yes.
But underneath that high is deep-rooted guilt, because it's not the truth of who we are. So that's really the bigger issue, is that even if we get that quick fix or we get a quick moment of relief because we're pushing out and reflecting out what we don't want to feel within, we feel relief for a moment, but an unconscious sense of guilt begins to come over us, because deep down, we know that's not the truth of who we are.
And in the attack position and the judgment position, we don't have to feel vulnerable.
We can avoid vulnerability. Right. We can avoid shame. We can avoid feeling any or acknowledging any of the wounds from our past when we're in the stance of judgment.
So why should we do it?
Because ultimately, living in that place of judgment, we are constantly standing there with knives out, right? Yep. Constantly ready to fight.
Yep.
And every day we're triggered, and every day we're fighting each trigger.
Yep.
And then we're triggered again, and we're fighting the next trigger. Our nervous systems cannot handle this.
Yep.
And from a global standpoint, when we magnify these individual movements of judgment and attack, that cumulative energy begins to create what we're seeing in the world today.
Absolutely.
So I think this is a really important point, is that we need to take a personal responsibility for the terror that we're seeing in the world today. Because even those moment-to-moment judgmental thoughts are contributing a negative vibration that has a ripple effect.
See, Gabby, I agree with you 1,000%. It's just, how do we persuade people that it's in their ultimately not there, but the whole world's best interest to override these primitive responses that people seem to so want to go with?
Well, Doctor, I don't really like to persuade anyone.
Yeah.
I like to invite people to offer an invitation.
Sure.
And I really, truly, I don't like to preach to people who are unwilling.
Mm-hmm.
So my hope is to gather the willing.
Mm-hmm.
Gathering the willing, there are many of us out there, anyone who's listening to you today, anyone who's read your books, anyone who's read my books, there are people out there who are willing.
Mm-hmm.
And really the question is, are you willing to feel better?
Mm-hmm.
Are you willing to feel safer? Are you willing to feel more connected? Are you willing to feel more compassionate towards yourself? Are you willing to attract more of what you want into your life? And if the answers to any of those questions are yes, then I invite you to join me on this journey and open your mind to these steps.
Let me just encourage everyone who's listening to, if you're part of the willing, and I think most people listening to this podcast are, join Gabby. I mean, get her book, Judgment Detox, Release the Beliefs That Hold You Back from Living a Better Life. I mean, really, and it sounds dramatic to say it, but I believe it with every fiber of my being, the future of the world depends upon our somehow galvanizing this energy that she's talking about. And if you join her in her efforts and more people join that, then we can start all of us together generating that positive energy. Don't you think, Gabby?
I couldn't agree more. It's absolutely the reason I wrote this book. These are the times where we have to be very, very serious about what we're putting out into the world and begin to show up for it in a really big way.
And you offer the invitation sort of by modeling it, would you say?
Well, yes, absolutely. I think that we, in any moment, have an opportunity to look at our life. And people come to me all the time and they'll say things like, I don't have time. I teach meditation. I teach really beautiful mindful practices.
Right.
And people will say, well, I don't have time for meditation, or I don't have time to read the books and do the work. And my response is, do you have time to feel like crap, right?
Right.
So I do model it, because in all of my books, and particularly in this book, I share many, many personal anecdotes and experiences of how releasing judgment has set me free. I am very forthcoming with my reader of all the ways that I have judged, all the ways that I have detoured into fear and been unforgiving and held on to resentment.
So give us a couple examples of how releasing that has set you free.
Well, I wrote this book at a time where I was going through a lot of personal struggles with my family, with some friends. I applied the principles that I was living and applied the principles from the book, and have truly forgiven the people who I had been holding resentment toward, truly forgiven them. I've been given very clear direction on how to carry out the next phase of those relationships.
How did you forgive them?
I accepted that one of the steps in the book is called See for the First Time. And I practiced this step in truly seeing these specific people for all the things that I love about them and all the qualities of them that I admired most. And then I took the other parts of the book, which were the first two steps, which were really owning my shadows and looking at my wounds and seeing my part, seeing my judgment in the issues. While I may have felt like the victim of a situation, I spent some serious time auditing my part and seeing how I was contributing.
Did you do that alone or with a guide?
With the guidance of the book that I wrote.
Okay.
So I followed the steps from the book. And really did the work to see my part. And I practiced emotional freedom technique, which is the second step in the book, which is using EFT to really get to the deeper wounds that live beneath the judgment. I practiced that third step of seeing for the first time. I practiced the steps of really prayer and meditation to really get grounded in healing my belief system so that I could be free from the projections I placed upon these people. And then the final step of the book is forgiveness. And I put that step at the very end because I felt that these other steps were very necessary to get to the place where we could finally be willing to forgive.
Yes.
And then the practice of forgiveness in the book is very passive. It's really about offering our desire to forgive up to a power greater than ourselves and really inviting in a spiritual intervention, really opening up our consciousness to allow the miracle of forgiveness to be bestowed upon us. And it's not a very active step. It's a step of releasing and surrendering.
I'm fond of saying forgiveness is a process, not a moment.
Yeah, beautiful. Love it.
Yeah, it's something that's sort of ongoing, and you're much better heading in that direction than heading toward revenge.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, and yet so many people, when they say I demand justice, what they really mean is I demand revenge.
Often that is the truth, yeah.
And but what you're speaking is so, if only people could see it's in their best interest. They think they'll feel better when they get revenge, but they don't. They don't feel any better. They still carry that pollution inside of them.
Right.
Yeah.
People feel like when they walk around with that revenge, they feel like in some ways they're protecting themselves. They feel like they are, in some ways, that would be the way that they would stay safe, particularly if someone has been traumatized or if someone has been deeply wounded, which can also be reflected a traumatic event. They use that feeling of defense mechanism in efforts to avoid having to feel the severe pain that lives underneath it.
What were the worst wounds that you suffered?
some of the things that I've uncovered throughout the process here is memories from my traumatic memories from my childhood, healing, forgiving myself for detouring so far to the place of drug addiction and alcoholism.
Those were the traumas, were the drug addiction?
Yeah, I got sober when I was 25, so I've been sober now for 12 years. And
when did the addiction start?
Probably I'd been running for most of my life, I imagine. But the drug abuse and addiction was pretty fast, probably off and on for a few years, and then got pretty bad towards the end.
So you weren't an addict in high school?
Not in the sense that I would have recognized that I needed to get clean and sober, but I did have a dysfunctional relationship to drugs and alcohol when I was in high school.
Do you happen to have ADHD?
I probably do.
The reason I ask is there's a big relationship between addiction and ADHD, and the biggest undiagnosed group are adult women. So,
wow,
we ought to talk about it at some point because it's.
We might have to have a private conversation.
Yeah.
I definitely think that I may have ADHD, and in some ways I think it's been one of my greatest virtues, and in some ways, of course, it could be.
That's the whole thing about it. It's what makes it so interesting. If you manage it right, it's an incredible blessing. Some of the most talented, most successful people in the world have it, but on the other hand, it's got a downside that can hurt you. So I'll get in touch with you when we're finished and we can talk about it.
I'd love to talk about it.
Yeah. So where did your gift come from? How did you develop this you were obviously incredibly intuitive and spiritually connected, and, how did that develop?
To be honest with you, I think that I was really quite willing to just release all the barriers that were in the way of those gifts that are within me. And I don't think I'm any different. I think we all have the same types of gifts within us. They just manifest in different ways.
Yes.
And I think those of us who are brave enough to wonder what the blocks are that are holding us back from stepping into those gifts and do whatever it takes to get closer to consciousness and get closer to a more peaceful path. When we have the willingness to be that brave and do that work, then we can allow our true gifts to be expressed.
Yes.
That's been my experience. I've just been really brave. I've just been willing to go there.
I agree with you. What do you think others are so afraid of? I suppose getting hurt or feeling embarrassed?
Feeling embarrassed, being hurt, facing the feelings of shame. I think the biggest thing that holds us back is the terrifying fear of facing our shame.
Yes.
And not even many people wouldn't even have a name, wouldn't even know that shame was what they were running from.
Right. And you just said, okay, I'm going to feel it and release it, and then...
Well, I've been doing this work on myself for over a decade, so it's been many stages of development. I think some of the heaviest lifting I've done on myself has been in the last 2 years. Not I think, I know. And even more than when I got sober, any of that. And some of the biggest work I've done on myself is over the last 2 years.
What was the hardest part of it?
Facing my shame. That has definitely been the most terrifying. But the beauty about it is that when you do give voice to your shame and you face it finally, you finally feel free. You feel truly free because you don't have to run from it anymore.
Now, listeners would say, what in the world do you have to be ashamed of? You're a beautiful woman, happily married, well-educated. You've written 6 books. You're successful. What shame could you possibly have?
Well, first of all, I think that we all carry shame from traumatic events from our childhood. And those traumatic events may be something as simple as somebody calling us stupid in the classroom or something far more significant, seemingly significant. But regardless of what the minor or significant instance was, it creates an imprint. And obviously this is what you teach and write about, I'm sure.
Yes.
But those imprints are shameful moments, feelings of being unlovable, inadequate, not good enough.
Yes.
And we do whatever we can to avoid feeling those feelings.
Yes.
And it really creates a tapestry that becomes our life, and we have to begin to redesign that.
Yes.
When we want to heal.
Yes. It's a wonderful gift you've given, and I'm so impressed that you've done this. Gabby Bernstein, an enlightened, gifted woman who has done an awful lot in her still relatively young life and is on her way to doing a lot more. Get her book. I'm quite certain it will set you free in many ways. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for having me on the show.
Take care. Bye-bye. As always, please reach out with your questions, comments, and show ideas. We absolutely depend on you. We'll answer your questions, we'll ponder your comments, and we will implement your show ideas. Pretty much guaranteed. I frequently answer your questions on the show, so please keep sending them in. Email us a note with your question or record a voice memo on your phone and send it to connect@distractionpodcast.com. That's connect@distractionpodcast.com. Or leave us a message by calling 844-55-CONNECT. If you like what you're hearing, please take a moment to rate and review us on Distraction on the Apple Podcast. If you do that, it really does help us, and it helps other podcast listeners find us. So if you like this growing community that we have, and I hope you do, please take a minute. Go to iTunes, click on podcast, or search Distraction Podcast, and write a review saying, this is the greatest thing since sliced podcasts or whatever. Thank you so much. If you would do that, take the time to do that. Distraction is produced by Collisions, the podcast division of CRN International. Collisions, podcasts for curious people. Our producer is Sarah Gurton, our sound engineer is Scott Person, and our music theme was created by Mark Berman.